Good afternoon, everyone. Here we are, standing between this discussion and lunch, and so, or rather sitting between it. This term Holy Trinity kind of invokes many images in my head. Holy Trinity means Brahma, Vishnu, Mahesh, uh, the forces of creation, destruction, and sustenance, and all those kind of things. But it also brings this image of the intersection of response, how do you respond to the needs and challenges at hand, responsibility as to how do you do it in a responsible way, and resilience, how do you prepare and build yourself for the times to come. And I'm hoping that with this esteemed panel today, we would have a discussion around how do we all come together to be able to actually bring forth the response to current challenges. How do we deal with that in a very responsible manner together and build resilience in our societies so that we can deal with challenges and opportunities that are ahead for us. It is a privilege to be here with all of you. Thank you so much. I would love to begin our discussion with hearing your initial reflections, but a very brief one, essentially focusing on when you have seen instances of all the actors of the Samaaj, and I use this term because while we may represent Samaaj, Sarkaar or Bazaar, we all are from Samaaj. We are the Samaaj, we are the society. And so when we look at coming together to solve problems of the Samaaj, what has been your one big plus or one big excitement, one big inspiration, and what has been your one big challenge that you have seen that we would love to start the discussion with? So I'll request Umaji, if we can begin.
Thank you. First of all, thank you for inviting me to be part of this very interesting discussion and this hour spending with all of you who are so committed to the cause of education and bringing change to the lives of people who are less disadvantaged and children who are less disadvantaged. Very interesting question. I would say that the immediate example that comes to my mind is during the COVID pandemic, when all sections of society immediately came forward. As the pandemic was unprecedented, so was the response. All sections of society immediately came forward to the call, responding to the call of the government, and joined hands with the government equally, readily, and very, very spontaneously for big change as well as small things. And that was pretty amazing. I had the fortune of being on the team that was coordinating the response with the civil society, with private sector, with international organizations, and so on. And we could see that the tremendous scale of the response as well as the quality was just outstanding, both in terms of augmenting the health infrastructure as well as in terms of the relief for those who were vulnerable and those who were affected. What was the biggest learning from that? The learning was the readiness, the level of trust, and that working together always leads to something being much greater than the sum of its parts. And that was very, very valuable, very precious. Following that, another very quick example is that of the revitalization of Karnataka's rural libraries, which we have had the fortune of doing from the Rural Development and Panchayati Raj Department, where during COVID, when schools were closed, we tried to see what could be done to keep kids connected, rural kids connected with learning. And we found that the 5,600 library spaces in rural areas were a great venue to help children maintain a connect with reading, with learning, and reduce anxiety of parents and so on. Again, foundations, civil society groups, NGOs, volunteers, and private sector, CSR partners, donors, came forward readily, so much so that we now have 3.3 million children into just over 2 years. We've enrolled 3.3 million children in our libraries, free of cost as members. We've collected 1.1 million books as donations. And most importantly, we've collected devices, digital devices, which are helping rural children in Karnataka, not just to bridge the divide, but actually in a constructive way to become strong, confident digital natives ready for 21st century needs. And I think that's a great example of what we can do together.
Thank you.
Following that, I'll mention two examples. One is during COVID itself, and this I'm wearing my chef hat now, that one of our students, we had the same problem. We run several educational initiatives, and a lot of these children are come from very marginalized communities, so clearly no access. And girls particularly, if there's one phone, the father will have it, and they don't get access to it. So what do we do? So one of our alum, on her own, she decided she had a phone, and so she got her 4 sisters, and she got 3 other girls, and on the rooftop, she decided, she said, I will facilitate. So she would call the teacher, take the lesson, teach it, and then move on. And so then we started a digital Sathi program where we really expanded the program widely and even offered it to the government. And so we were able to reach hundreds of girls because of that. That is one. The other one that I want to mention is that we run a critical feminist pedagogy, where, as we were mentioning in the earlier session, that, whether it's Dalits or it's women, one of the major thing that keeps them back is the fact that they don't believe that they are equal themselves. So our critical feminist pedagogy is a continuous program where in schools, the teacher will sit and talk to girls. We have critical dialogues where they understand the structural problems of gender discrimination, that they're equal, they have a right to everything and to be drivers of their own lives. So we did this regularly, and our own girls in our own schools were doing very well. One of them said, she says, आंटी ये तो सब ठीक है, लेकिन समाज में ले जाना चाहिए ना, बाहर तो कोई समझता नहीं, तो मैं बोला कैसे करें? So she says कि हम लोग meeting करेंगे. So can you imagine young girls, class 8 and all, and we would call the women there and talk to them and argue with them. Then it turned into a march in the community where more people joined. And then we worked with all the KGBVs. It became an India's Daughters campaign where all the students, and this ran into tens of thousands, would march in their community against gender discrimination, against child marriage, and violence against women. And today, it spans hugely, so it's hybrid now. And there are government schools, private schools, teachers, students, community members, and it's run into millions of people running this campaign. So that's another example. And just finally, Catalyst 2030, during COVID, we started off with just 80 civil service society organizations and we launched it in Davos. So we should all get together and work. And now there are 1,800 globally. And today we hope to launch the India Education Hub.
Thank you, Sanjay, and thank you for inviting me here. So I come from the crisis world. That's my daily bread and butter. And both these examples were about crises, the COVID pandemic. And we've seen that, obviously, in a crisis, it naturally brings people together. So the one example that I would like to really quote, which is a beautiful Trinity here of Samaaj, Sarkaar and Bazaar, was in the 2015 Nepal earthquake. We know thousands of people lost their lives, about 150,000 people. And the entire country was destroyed. About 500,000, 600,000 houses were destroyed in very, very remote areas, very high elevations, almost, some places requiring 6 days to reach. Now, how do you reach out to such large number of people? And they were without homes, without any sort of shelter in the month of April and May. So that's when, some very unique creative ways came about of at least providing them some kind of a transitional arrangement. Permanent was so hard. I mean, making one house takes months, if not years. And that is when the government said that, okay, we will provide you with the basic cost that will go directly into the bank account of the person who's affected. The civil society, can you take responsibility of building these homes in these villages through your network of volunteers? And the private sector there, and in this particular case, it was an FMCG company, manufacturers of YY noodles. And YY is more popular than Maggi in Nepal. Who had the ability to reach out to the remotest, the pan ki dukan in every village. And they leverage that network to move material like basic bamboos and GI sheets to all parts of the country in no time. Within a month, we could move that. We did a whole range of trainings of local workers who were in that village. They were retired police personnel, retired service personnel, who would then train local communities to actually rebuild homes in a particular manner that could be done without any labor inputs. They could do it themselves. And that's how, within no time, thousands of houses actually came about all over the country. And I think this was a very, very beautiful trinity that worked out. So that's one very positive example there. Comparative advantage of each sector is played out, and that kind of reinforces the final outcome. The other problem that, the other side to this whole story is always, ma'am said about the question of trust building. That doesn't happen so quickly. And often we need to address that. And somewhere in this whole process, the one drop, that one area that gets neglected somehow is, how do we ensure the agency of people there in that kind of thing? You know, things in a crisis, we think that we know their problem, and because they are in a problem, they cannot address the solution. Right. And I think that kind of kills the whole idea of Samaaj, Sarkaar, Bazaar.
Thank you, Manu. Nitin?
First of all, again, thank you very much for having me here. I was not aware I'm representing all of Bazaar. So, but I'll share my thoughts from my perspective. So, just to set some context, I work in Google in the education team, and specifically on a product called Read Along, which is for helping young children learn to read on the foundational literacy side. Right. So from my limited experiences, I'll share some insights here. And I feel like a high school student sitting with all of you, like with stalwarts here. So from the personal experience, I think so. Given the kind of product Read Along is, which is free, right, and you have to really, for it to have impact, you have to reach to the audience or the segment that really you can't reach with any other channel, right? So from the get-go, partnering with either NGOs in the community or governments has been a very critical enabler for the success of the product, right? So one specific example where really the three came together is a very short 2-week sort of campaign that we did together with the state of Tamil Nadu, right? And there the way, this is when the schools were closed, just after COVID, before students were coming back, right? And the idea was, how can we have, like run a reading marathon there, right? And have children prep before they come to school and get back into the habit of reading, etc., right? So the three things that came together was, obviously from the product side or technology side, we had a product which had been in the market, and we can talk about it later too. The government was very interested in and a very clear like sort of mandate and a will and a drive to do this. And they could mobilize the community. So they had a community of 1.8 lakh volunteers who they could reach out to, right? And when the three came together, within no time, within that 2-week period, short 2-week period, out of the 34 lakh students in the state, more than 18 lakh students actually, for a period of 2 weeks, with the help of volunteers who in the evening called them at their home, and 10, like just as you were saying, that girl who brought the 10 people together, these volunteers, each of them got 10 to 20 children together every day for 2 weeks, and they read, right, on the app, and they shared and everything. And over that 2-week period, they read for 6 crore hours, right? 18 lakh children read for 6 crore minutes there, and more than 1 crore different stories, right? Now this is like we worked with many other governments and many other initiatives also, but this is a very clear example where the three coming together made a huge difference.
Amazing examples, amazing illustrations. Thank you so much. One clear theme that's emerging is that Samaaj, Sarkaar, Bazaar comes together very effectively in times of crisis. And let's extrapolate this question, because what we saw during the pandemic was widespread impact and devastation in a very short period of time. But if you look at our other challenges as a country, whether they are education, whether they are healthcare, whether they are livelihoods, these are, these are similar challenges, but in slow motion. It's just that we don't observe it happening over 25, 30, 40 years. If what happened in the last 25 years, say in healthcare or say in education, were to happen in 25 months, obviously you will see the widespread destruction way more clearly. So the question that I would love to pose to the panel is, how do we come together as Samaaj, Sarkaar, Bazaar on issues that are equally impactful, but on a very different time scale? They are equally devastating, they are equally damaging to lives and livelihoods of people and generations of people, but on a very different time scale. And so time is not going to give us that impetus, that sense of urgency. What can we do? What would, say, Sarkar expect from Samaaj and Bazaar, or Samaaj expect from Sarkar and Bazaar, and reciprocally, that all of us come together because these issues are as urgent as the pandemic, just not collapsing in the front of our eyes, but slowly melting away as we are progressing through our lives. So I'd love to request Umaji to comment, and then probably we'll reverse the order. Umaji, then we'll go to Nitin, come to Manu, and then come back to Urvashi.
Thanks for that question. Yes, it's always true that we tend to respond best during a crisis, whether it's the government, where a clear command and control situation emerges, or whether it's partnerships that are evolved during a crisis. And we saw that very much in action during the COVID pandemic. But I would say that the pandemic itself, because it was not a 1 day or a 1 week or a brief thing, but stretched into 2 years and ongoing thing, the pandemic itself offers lessons for this, for the way forward. So we saw the need. We knew that phase 1, the first wave of the pandemic, was not the end. I mean, it was very clear that this had not gone away. And therefore, even then, we saw the need to build networks of care and networks of working together, which would sustain, which had a very clear communication strategy, which were flat networks. They were not hierarchical. They were flat, and that flatness was an important part of trust building. I still remember the early days of the pandemic. We had, in March 2020, we were working out of, over one weekend when the entire thing was happening in front of our eyes, we were working out of, each one of us was working out of 2 phones and setting up WhatsApp groups, and we had this one large baggy WhatsApp group. I think some NGOs here might remember that one unfiltered, huge WhatsApp group that we created in Karnataka, unmoderated, because we needed to have a very quick way of communicating, hearing from the ground, but also creating, as we went along, evolving into breakout groups which would focus on separate areas. But again, when those groups met across online platforms, communicated, continued finding ways to collaborate. So again, a very concrete example. In the second wave of the pandemic, a health NGO came to us saying that USAID is funding us and we'd like to give home isolation kits to the rural poor. And then when we looked at the data, we found that the rural poor would not be able to isolate effectively at home, even with the kits, because it was not practically possible. They didn't have the space, the toilets were common, they could not segregate. And so we evolved a different strategy altogether of giving health screening kits, including COVID screening kits, to the Gram Panchayats, the rural local bodies. So 6,000 local bodies, 2,800 of them got these health screening kits, which included screening for comorbidities like hypertension and diabetes and malnutrition, anemia, and so on. And all of that, along with pulse oximeters and infrared thermometers. During the pandemic, in the second wave, 2,800 panchayats, that is 14 districts, were doing screenings. So we have 45 lakh workers, rural workers, who are working on the MGNREGA, Rural Employment Scheme, who are active job card holders and working on any given day. You'll have lakhs and lakhs of these people working on the field, who are unable to leave that 300 rupees a day wage in order to get their blood pressure checked. But you can actually, instead of taking a huge high-tech piece of equipment, you can actually take this low-tech glucometer or this low-tech blood pressure monitor to the field, literally to the field, to get them checked. And so that is a program which, again, it's not a pandemic, but the NCD crisis, health crisis, stares us in the face. It's been there for some time. So here is a way of actually taking healthcare, health screening out of the facility and into the community. And that evolved during the pandemic. So I think there are many lessons there if we study well the ways in which we have worked together during the pandemic. This is just one example. There are others. I told you about the libraries. There are ways to work together in a sustained way. Again, another area which needs urgent help is the crisis of domestic violence, violence against women, where, again, effective partnerships can be built. But, you know, going forward, those are areas where good work can be done.
Amazing.
Yeah. I think your question was like, we demonstrated it in the time of crisis, what's coming in the way of doing it regularly. And I think my perspective on that would be, it's, in my mind, more of a question of a mindset change. I kind of treat the pandemic as a lab experiment which demonstrated that this is possible, right? But I think the reason that prevents, like what are the underlying reasons that sort of are the challenges that we face in bringing these together? And I'm sure you have thought about it the most, right? But a few of the, I think some observations which you were also hinting to is, I think there has to be a realization, or is happening more and more, that for each of these sort of organizations or types of bodies, there are some very different, fundamentally different beliefs, incentives, strengths, and weaknesses, right, that each of them come to. And we don't have that mutual recognition yet, right? Because when anybody is approaching a problem, it's all from their perspective, from the lens that they see, from what is under their control, how can they have that effect, right? And my observation would be like as we discuss some good examples in small pockets of the three coming together, I almost wanted to answer your first question as I can't think of something at a big scale that where really the three have come together for a sustained long period of time. There are good examples of two combinations, a Samaaj and a Sarkaar coming together, Samaaj and a Bazaar coming together, or Sarkaar and a Bazaar coming together. They're great examples, like including UPI, including the tech that we're talking about. But there, the role of the Samaaj in that is still more of just as a benefactor, as a receiver. They're not as participant of that change movement as much, right? So I think the underlying question of maybe what is holding us back from doing it even on a slower scale is that flip in mind. Once we start recognizing each other's strengths and weaknesses and the complementary things we bring to the table, and then put it in context of a shared objective that we want to achieve, this will happen much more, would be my thought.
Thanks, Nitin. Manu?
Yeah, no, just building on what he said, this flip is a very important point. What we have done, and I would like to take an example in the education sector, is move upstream into looking at what are the causes that created that disaster in the first place. I mean, in the recent earthquakes, for example, including the one in Turkey and Syria, we've had huge losses in the education sector. And you know, the 2005 earthquake happened on the Kashmir, in Kashmir, where the major epicenter was in Pakistan. The earthquake happened on 8th October 2005 at 8:45 a.m. That was the time the schools were on. 17,000 children died in that 1 minute. So for us, what we have done is that rather having that whole fire truck syndrome, which is that when there will be crisis, we will be rushing there, we work upstream. And some of the successful examples have been in how do you prepare school children to be able to face crisis better. And it requires not just, you know, reinforcing those buildings, but also behavioral change about how do you manage even small crises, you know, on day to day. When we spoke to young primary school children, they were scared of insects coming inside their classrooms. And that would affect learning outcomes. Small things like that, and when you start addressing them together, we found that a lot of individuals, and I won't say private sector per se, but individuals who are working in the private sector came to us and started working on these issues as volunteers. And this is now the school safety program that SEEDS undertakes in the country is now been practiced in 16 states with state governments. Right. And it, so the idea is you address small day-to-day risks so that you don't reach that tipping point, or you are better prepared when that big one happens.
I want to build on actually your point on education really, and what you were saying about the lessons learned through COVID. So one of the major lessons I think that educators have learned, I know we have, that, and we've recommended that, is that instead of school always being the center of education, and all education will happen in schools, it'll be done by formal teachers, we learned that distributed teaching and learning spaces worked very well. They were more acceptable by the community, the community took ownership, and they really, if without that, many more children would have been left out of the education loop. So why not make that a practice in peace times as well, or in times of crisis? And we are recommending to the government that that's a good model. There used to be non-formal learning spaces, it stopped. But it's a good idea. We had 25 such centers before the pandemic. During pandemic, we went up to 145. And now we're expanding them much more in collaboration with the government. That is one. The other one that you mentioned, crises that are crises, but because they happen over time, nobody recognizes them. And you mentioned domestic violence. Child marriage, I call it really girl slavery. It's not marriage. Let's not sanctify it by that.
Yeah.
India is home to 1/3 of the world's child slaves, girl slaves, right? And they are dying because of that. And gender discrimination through random everyday violence, routine, it's worse than terrorism and has lethal consequences. And some people say more girls have died because of this, they call it gendercide, than all the people in the wars, right? And yet no one is really doing anything on a campaign footing, which they should. So that is another thing, that if Sarkaar, Samaaj, we saw earlier that when Sarkar wants things to happen, how they throw everything at it. Why is this not an important thing? When you mention it, they don't want to be called the child marriage capital. But at the same time, why aren't we using this? Why aren't we going on a campaign footing? And domestic violence, it's rampant. Girls are under terrorism threat every day of their lives, and mostly at home, right? Why is that not important during everyday times to take very seriously, to turn into a campaign, and for all of them to come together, the Holy Trinity, like you called, and to take the action that it needs, right? And finally, with Catalyst 2030, what we did last year was we put together this report. We are a group of, I told you, 1,800 social entrepreneurs, and our goal is really to catalyze the SDGs, that unless we come together, 2030, they're never happening. So one of the things we did was, as educators, is to come up with this whole report called Pathways to Transforming Education. And what we mean with that is to take it to governments and to advocate for a complete transformation based on these principles that we've evolved, to change it while we can, learn the lessons that we have learned, all the lessons that social innovators have, and bring about this change. Let's not wait for another crisis.
Great. So as I interact with more and more leaders from Sarkar, one of the things that I think a lot about is, in all this conversation, are we factoring in scale? Because Sarkar has to deal with scale. It can't be saying, I do a part of that and I do a part of this. It can't be that I have figured out 2,000 schools or 5,000 people. India is a country of 1.3 billion people. We're talking about 400 million people struggling with access to healthcare. We're talking about 10-50 million children across 1.5 million schools. We're talking about very different magnitude of effects. And one of the common questions is that, how do you marry the innovation that Bazaar wants to bring into play, the empathy and the depth of work that Samaaj wants to play, with that it needs to be done at scale? Where is that partnership or possibility saying, can we all come together to actually be able to do this at scale? Because that's what we have. The reality of India is that it's not a boutique country. It's extremely diverse. It's a country of 1 billion contexts. So how do you actually work together to figure this out is a question that I would have, and love to start with probably Urvashi ji this time.
on at the end. But no. Okay. So, I just want to make a slight correction. I think the innovation, Samaaj actually has all the most innovative practices, right? And that's where the bazaar gets it from. So how do you put these things together? I'll give you a small example from our own organization. As I mentioned, that we used to do this critical feminist pedagogy. We developed a curriculum, and we used to video all our critical dialogues. Somebody from UNICEF saw it. She says that, can we do this with the government in 3 districts in the KGBVs? I said, yeah, of course we can. So we trained the teachers on how to do this, and it succeeded. She said, let's do 5 more. And then we put it together, and we did it with all the 740 KGBVs because the Sarkaar accepted it, took ownership. They take ownership, but give us their blessing, right? Now, over the years, what has happened this year when we did it, they took it as their program, right? And this is meant to eliminate child marriage. It's meant to eliminate domestic violence. Help girls, gives girls a voice that they can speak up, right? We haven't yet attacked bazaar with it. We don't know how to. I don't know what bazaar will get out of it, but you will get a lot if you try. Sorry to make you the poster boy, but I just meant that. So actually, that, I think what Sarkar needs to understand is that they need Samaaj for anything to happen. Now just see, election time. What a great example. Phat se, quickly Samaaj is reached out to, right? And the campaigns that the government runs, they can't do it without Samaaj. So the Samaaj has a lot of innovations to offer. We have our ear to the ground. We have the trust of the community. So for Sarkar's own goals, it needs to partner with the Samaaj to make this happen. And in our Catalyst 2030, what we're doing is addressing bazaar, addressing the corporates, saying that they need to change how they do business if we are to achieve the SDGs, and how they can work, again, with Sarkar and Samaaj. So.
I think I would like to certainly request Umaji to come in here, because I'm sure there is nuance to this. It is not probably as straightforward as understanding each other's perspective. There is a complexity, and there is a certain amount of, it's a very complex and dynamic issue to deal with in such a large moving system. It's not a static sitting system that one could go after. So I would love to hear some nuances of when working at scale, Samaaj and Bazaar, what is the nuance that they should learn about, right? So that they can actually come together rather than treating scale as just a number. It's not a number, it's a very complex and dynamic number.
Thanks for that. Very interesting listening to Urvashi talking about that KGBV experience. Incidentally, I should start by saying that one of the ways in which government does look for these ways to partner is actually to keep a very close ear to the ground. So I've been listening very carefully to what my co-panelists are saying, and I definitely want to talk to each one of you about critical feminist pedagogy, about school safety, and about read-along of Google, because we'd like to partner with all these, definitely. So we do tend to look out for good partnerships, good spaces, and after a certain number of years working in the field and working in whichever sector, whether it's government or in civil society or in private sector, you tend to have a very quick understanding of what is likely to go well. And so I'm sure we can evolve some good partnerships. There's nuance, but there's also this quick assessment which we have to do. Quality and scale. So it's very kind of facile to say that with government you get scale, and with only with NGO partnerships you get quality. In the ideal situation, yes. In the ideal situation, yes. But sometimes, even within the state sector, one tends to get lost in the intricacies of pilots, in the intricacies of priority-based phase 1, and then, by the time you reach phase 2, or when you ought to be doing phase 2, somebody has moved on, or the entire team has moved on, and so on. And so roadmap-based thinking, roadmaps that are evolved, clear governance structures where all 3 partners, ideally there should be 3 partners, state and civil society and private sector. Private sector, not just for the funding, actually, but also for a very clear KPI-based way of thinking which brings clarity to the project. So I think there's value to be added from all three partners. Again, I would say that state, having realized that the old days of the old, pilots and priority areas and so on, we now need to start thinking of saturation. We now need to start thinking of drawing clear roadmaps right at the stage of pilots, quickly assessing the pilot, getting a quick and dirty evaluation, roll up the sleeves, find out what works, what needs to change on the ground, and then find a way to scale up quickly without losing as much of the quality as you can. So there are ways to do this. I gave you 2 examples of the libraries program, the health program, but there are other ways, and those are things that all three partners actually have to think. But finally, I would just say one thing. I think what actually works, many times these don't work. And when it doesn't work, I don't need to give you examples, but I will say that one of the reasons it doesn't work is when any one of the partners makes it about themselves and not about the work itself.
Correct.
When everybody is on board, on the same page, trying to make it about the impact, make it about improving people's lives, because that's, the stakes are very high for improving people's lives, especially when you're working in areas that are so critical as education, children, women, empowerment, health of the most vulnerable. I think it's very, very important to keep your eye very clearly on that and to have high integrity about your purpose, not only about your procedures. Right. That's when it works.
Amazing, thank you. I'd like to ask Nitin to respond to this fact that this interesting question about scaling what works versus what works at scale. And Bazaar, since you're representing Bazaar today, for the next few more minutes at least, and you're like watching this Samaaj Sarkaar conversation going on, and you're like, what's in it for me? Why should I be playing this? I have to go prove my ROI. There's a board that's watching me, and so on and so forth. How do you react to this dialogue? And I'm sort of obviously hyperbolizing it just to get your sense of where you are with this. How do you react to this?
Multiple responses I can give on that. So I think just some observations again. Even in this dialogue we have been, there is still a little bit of, these are not collective, these are different sections, and this is what I think is not working with this particular section. I would love to have a question where we talk about what is the complementary thing that we see in each other's sectors, right? What is it that really can bring us together, and what is the value that when all of them become, what is the complementary value? Again, that's a very very typical tech way of thinking about when you're partnering. What is the value that all of us get? To your specific question about why should Bazaar care, right? And again, there are 2 or 3 different levels. Bazaar is not just one entity. It's a very heterogeneous, and there are different levels and different companies with different philosophies. At the root of it, at the heart of it, obviously private, like Bazaar has 2 sides, right? There is a supplier and there is a consumer, right? A buyer. Samaaj is the buyer, or government is the buyer. There is no market, there is no company that can exist without Samaaj or without the Sarkar, right? That is the only 2 business models that work, right? So even like just at that level, it makes sense for Bazaar to be aware of, or markets or companies to be aware of, what is it that my consumers want from me, right? How can I serve them better? If you're a good company, you will think that. You will not just think, how can I fleece, or how can I extract the most? You will think about, how can I serve them the most? How can we generate the most value? And there are companies who start from that point too. Specifically, again, coming back, and again, the answer varies sector by sector. Let's talk about education, right? And for a company like Google, because that's what I can represent, right? Why does education matter? Why does it not matter? Without education, there is no meaning to the fundamental mission statement of Google, right? If helping people understand the world's information better, if they don't have the capabilities, then how's it going to work? And it's not just about the mission, it's then also about, it makes pure business sense. If you have more educated people at large, you will have a more educated, well-to-do, capable workforce. If you will have a more capable workforce, you will have a higher society that is spending higher per capita and higher earning and higher disposable expenditure, right? Ultimately, even for your services that may help in actually delivering better outcomes, or for all of the services that are not related to education but are long-term, you want a healthy market, right? You need a healthy bazaar for the companies to survive. So even that philosophical level, there is an answer that is why they should be aligned, right? Then even if you come to one level below, an individual team level, right? Why does my team care? And you said, yes, I have to go back and think about what is my ROI, what is my next, what is the objective I have told my leaders that, okay, this is what we will achieve by the end of this year, what are the key results we will achieve, right? So within all of these things, teams that are working are very mission driven. Our team's mission is universal literacy, right? So we measure how many children are actually improving learning, and our leaders support us for that. They don't support us for how many just numbers, but what is the improvement that you are making happen. So even that can be aligned, right? I think all of these can be aligned, and I will go back to my earlier observation. It is about realizing that these sectors or these participants have different beliefs, different incentives, different incentive time horizons, different strengths and weaknesses. But we have to start from the strengths of each other and not the weaknesses of each other. I think is very important.
That's a great perspective, and the fact that we all share a common goal and share a common vision, because this is a long haul. Samaaj, Sarkaar, Bazaar partnerships are not transactional partnerships. They are long-haul partnerships. So I'd love to open this question to Manu, saying, how do you sustain this relationship? Because obviously in all organizations, people will come, transitions will happen, our society will change, there will be macroeconomic transitions. Change is a constant under all changing conditions. Assuming nothing is constant, including the five of us on the stage. How do you sustain a level of partnership? Because transformation of a large number of people takes time. So how do you ensure that you can stay with it?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, Sanjay. And we often struggle with great initiatives burning out after some time, great partnerships not lasting. And I think the one nuance that I can share from experience is the aspect of relevance. How do you keep partnerships relevant to the changing times? In that, one approach that we have taken is a problem-solving approach, where you are constantly bringing up new challenges to that network, to that platform, and addressing them to the multiple diverse audience that that platform addresses. And so by keeping that whole engine kind of lubricated with the relevant topics coming up, the relevant problems being addressed, an inherent sustainability is built. And I've seen that with civil society networks that I've co-founded both in India and outside globally, that some have died, and I regret, not having invested that much time, but the others that have sustained have kept themselves relevant to that change. And that's how they have been very successful.
Yes, sure.
That question theoretically, I mean, again, thinking about what are the relative strengths or advantages that the different sectors bring, that for me is the biggest advantage of Samaaj, right? The time horizons of government are 5 year, 5 year, 5 year. The time horizons of Bazaar are quarter, year, right? The time, but it is ultimately the Samaaj that is who all this is about, right? And unless the change is embedded at Samaaj, it will not sustain. Right? So they have to be a participant in a design, and in equally participating in the design, the implementation, the ownership. Yeah. It cannot be done for them. It has to be done with them. Right.
Interesting. Urvashi ji, just grab the mic immediately. Love to hear her perspective.
No. It was just a funny aside, which I'm happy to lend. Is that, I was working with, when you work with Sarkaar. Sorry. But, so, my God, even for a no-cost MOU, will take 6 months. All right. Now, when you work with education, half the year is gone. So I was, frustrated and telling my IAS officer friend, I said, yaar, kya kare, ye to bilkul. He says, she, never mind. Dekho, ultimately, ho jata hai. I said, yaar, ultimately, ho jata hai. Tab tak bacche graduate kar jayenge, but wo ultimately ho jata hai. So it's not as though the Sarkaar is 5 years. Wo bhi anant.
Would love to hear Umaji's reaction on sustaining not only on this one, but sustaining the partnership on a long-term basis.
Yeah, I need to respond to Urvashi's thing, which is, it is true. It is true that the horizon in government tends to be ultimate. Ultimately, ho jata hai. It's true. But to be fair and, to speak up on behalf of colleagues, I have to say that usually we are juggling multiple balls. We are firefighting on multiple fronts. The urgent is usually pushing the important to the side. So, and multiple priorities. It's not just, I may be the leader of a department. I should also correct that very nice introduction and say that I led some departments, but I have not led health and education as principal secretary. I have worked in health and education as field commissioner in education, and in health I was deputy secretary. But the fact is that, you are representing many, and there are many demands on your time, on your mental bandwidth, and on your list of priorities. So sometimes things do get delayed. Having said that, I should also say, and juggling many balls is something that helps you. Sometimes you try not to drop a ball, but sometimes something gets rolls under the table. But I would say that even sustaining these partnerships requires, it's an art and requires finesse. It requires the art to juggle many balls. I have at any given time, I have in my department 7 or 8 different partnerships that I have to keep checking on, and you end up with a priority list, you check on it. But also it's a way of checking in the way you would mentor and you would nurture a friendship. Policy making and implementation is all about nurturing different programs. I treat many of my programs as I would treat, something that I'm nurturing, a plant or a garden, because you need to check in on them. You need to check in on how things are going. Does anybody need any help? That's all part of leadership. Does anybody need a problem? Has anybody come to me when you have a problem that you can't solve? As long as people get that message, that's one thing. The other thing is, again, I would say integrity of purpose. I think it was Harry Truman who said that you can get a lot of things done when you don't care who gets credit. And as long as everybody is in agreement with that, you are always sharing the impact with others and making it clear that everybody's contribution is valued, then you can sustain things well beyond the 5-year horizon or the quarter or the year or beyond even a single team. Teams can change, but that commonality of purpose is something which can be very beautiful and very strong in committing ourselves to a goal that's bigger than all of us.
Amazing. Thank you. We packed in a lot of insights into a 45-minute panel. We have just about 3 minutes left. And what I would love to do now to summarize, and I will not try to summarize the discussion because I can't do justice to it. But what I would love to hear from you is, there are friends from Samaaj, Sarkaar, Bazaar, many listening, many here. What do you think is the immediate call to action for all the other actors besides you? For example, if you are Sarkaar, then immediate call to action for maybe all three, because you can have what's the call to action? What should we do now? We are sitting at this very important junction where the world is watching, especially with now the G20 presidency, and everyone's watching what is happening. We are the world's largest democracy. The pandemic has damaged lots, and we have our own share to work with, and we have our own share. There's so much happening. Everyone's eyes are on India. And this is the time, which is a crisis of a very different magnitude. And hopefully this is the time when Samaaj, Sarkaar, Bazaar will come together in a benchmark way in India. What is your advice? What do you think we should do? Who wants to take a stab? Yes.
Just 10 seconds, that's all. I think it's very important for everyone to sit down together and talk continuously, consistently. And as Samaaj, what we are advocating for in Catalyst 2030 particularly is for a seat at the table. That, consult us. We have our ears to the ground. We have tried, tested solutions, and we are at your service. So consult us and let us help. Let us be of service. So I think importantly to understand it is common cause, and unless we sit down together and talk, it won't work. So.
Okay.
Well, I wanted to say the same thing, but but I think the most important to me is to to have that understanding that it's a common problem now. I think the COVID made that very, very relevant, that a crisis could enter my house, and it's not a crisis out there. And I think that's the most important lesson for us to, and the most important trigger for us to start coming together and saying that we need to address this jointly.
Great.
Yeah. I think add a theme on it. So sit down together as friends, right? Empathy for each other, right? I think is very important to bring in. And then if you marry it with shared purpose, and then a bias for action,
Right.
I think, right? Like sit down as friends with a shared purpose, and let's move towards something.
Umaji?
Yeah, I think it's been very clearly laid out. I don't have anything to add other than to say that the problems are very clear. We know what the problems are. We know what the solutions are too. And all we need to do is really find ways of working together and keep working together until we do something about them.
Thank you so much. Very amply clear. We are all members of the Samaaj, but we have roles to play. Roles as Sarkar, role as Bazaar, role as Samaaj's representatives in that sense. And I think it's time to come together. And thank you so much for being a very patient audience.